At 73 years old, Maria woke up on a Tuesday morning and realized she had gone 4 entire days without speaking to another human being. It wasn't a choice. It just happened. The silence of the house had become so familiar that she barely noticed it anymore. It was when she looked into the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger staring back that she understood she was disappearing. Not physically, but in a much more frightening way. She was becoming invisible to the world and worse, to herself. What Maria didn't know at that moment was that she was experiencing something that affects more than 60% of Brazilians over the age of 65, and that this silent epidemic kills more people than diabetes and hypertension combined. Loneliness in old age is not just sadness or melancholy. It is a destructive force that corrodes the immune system, accelerates brain aging, and can reduce life expectancy by up to 15 years. But here's what few people know: there is a brutal difference between being alone and feeling lonely. Maria was surrounded by neighbors, had children who called occasionally, but lived in an invisible prison of disconnection. And what if I told you there are 3 simple attitudes, ones that can be implemented starting today, capable of breaking these chains? You might be thinking, here comes another article about making friends. But pause for a second. What I'm about to share goes against everything you've ever heard about fighting loneliness. I won't talk about senior groups or dance classes. I will reveal revolutionary scientific discoveries that have completely changed our understanding of human connection in later life. Studies that show why traditional strategies fail 87% of the time and how 3 specific changes can recreate your social network in ways you never imagined possible. Maria's story took an extraordinary turn 3 months after that moment in the mirror. Today, at 76, she told me something that gave me chills. "Doctor, I've never felt so connected to the world. Not because I have more friends, but because I finally understood how true human connection works." What she discovered goes against everything we've learned about relationships. And the most incredible part is that anyone can apply these 3 attitudes, regardless of age, personality, or current social situation. But before revealing these attitudes, you need to understand something shocking about the loneliness epidemic that is destroying the health of millions of Brazilians right now. In 2019, a study by the University of São Paulo analyzed more than 50,000 people over the age of 60 and discovered something terrifying. 73% reported feeling deeply lonely, even while living with family members. Most disturbing of all, this loneliness was not related to the number of people around them, but to something much deeper and more complex. Chronic loneliness activates the same pain centers in the brain as a serious physical injury. Imagine feeling constant pain, like a burn, that no one can see or touch. That's exactly what happens in the brain of someone who is emotionally isolated. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for processing emotional pain, remains in a constant state of alert, releasing cortisol and other inflammatory substances that literally destroy our bodies from the inside out. Dr. Robert Waldinger, director of the famous Harvard study of adult development, followed more than 700 people for 80 years and made a revolutionary discovery: the quality of relationships is the most important factor for happiness and longevity, far more than money, professional success, or even genetics. But here's the detail that changes everything: it's not the number of relationships that matters, but the depth of emotional connection we establish. This explains why Maria, despite having children and neighbors, felt completely isolated. Her interactions were superficial, based on courtesy and social obligations rather than genuine connection. It's like trying to nourish yourself with sugary water. It feels like nourishment, but actually creates an even greater deficiency. Now you may be wondering, if the problem isn't a lack of people, what is the real cause of the loneliness epidemic in old age? The answer may surprise you. A study published in Psychological Science in 2020 revealed that social isolation in later life is not a consequence of aging itself, but of 3 specific behavioral patterns developed throughout life that intensify with age. The first pattern is what researchers call the passive observer syndrome. Over the years, many people adopt the posture of spectators of their own lives. They wait for others to take initiative, for invitations to appear, for opportunities for connection to arise naturally. It's like sitting at a train station waiting for someone to come get you, without ever buying a ticket. The second pattern is even more devastating: the diminished competence trap. Many older adults begin to believe they have little to offer others, that their experiences are no longer relevant, that they are a burden. This belief creates a vicious cycle in which the person withdraws more and more, confirming their own prophecy of social irrelevance. The third pattern is the most subtle and dangerous: reactive emotional dependence. Many older adults condition their emotional well-being on the actions of others. If a child doesn't call, if a neighbor doesn't greet them, if a grandchild doesn't visit, they interpret it as personal rejection and shut down even further. Joao, 68, lived all three patterns simultaneously after retiring. A former successful engineer, he spent 2 years waiting for former colleagues to reach out, feeling useless without professional responsibilities, and interpreting every social interaction as confirmation that he had become irrelevant. The result? Severe depression and total isolation. But Joao's story underwent an extraordinary transformation when he discovered the 3 attitudes I'm about to reveal. In 6 months, he not only overcame loneliness but became one of the most connected and influential people in his community. And most impressively, he did it without leaving home, without joining social groups, and without depending on anyone else to take initiative. The first revolutionary attitude is what I call proactive strategic generosity. But pay attention, I'm not talking about traditional charity or volunteer work, though those can be included. I'm talking about a completely different approach to creating meaningful connections, based on a fascinating discovery from social neuroscience. Researchers at the University of Michigan discovered that the human brain is wired to form deep bonds through a specific mechanism. When we offer something valuable to another person, we activate the reward system in both our brain and theirs. But here's the secret few people know: the value doesn't have to be material. In fact, the strongest bonds are created when we offer something only we can give: our unique experience, our personal perspective, our accumulated wisdom. Maria discovered this by accident. 3 days after the mirror episode, she was standing in line at the bank when she overheard a young mother crying on the phone, desperate because she couldn't get her baby to stop crying. Maria gently approached and shared a simple technique she had learned raising her own children decades earlier. In 5 minutes, the baby was peacefully asleep. The gratitude in that mother's eyes awakened something in Maria that had been dormant for years: the feeling of being needed, of having something valuable to offer. But Maria didn't stop there. She intuitively understood something profound: every person carries within them a treasure of experiences, knowledge, and wisdom capable of transforming others' lives. The issue isn't having something to offer, it's identifying what is uniquely yours and finding creative ways to share it with the world. Proactive strategic generosity works on 3 levels simultaneously. First, it breaks the passive observer pattern because it requires you to take initiative and become the active protagonist of your social life. Second, it destroys the diminished competence trap because you experience firsthand the value you bring. Third, it eliminates reactive emotional dependence because your fulfillment comes from giving, not receiving. Joao implemented this attitude brilliantly. As a former engineer, he began offering free online consulting to young entrepreneurs. He created a simple social media profile offering 30 minutes of weekly mentorship to anyone who needed technical guidance. Within 2 weeks, he had a waiting list of 50 people. In 2 months, he had built a network of relationships with young people across Brazil who saw him as a mentor and a friend. But here's the crucial detail: Joao wasn't just helping others. He was strategic about using generosity to create genuine connections. Each mentorship session became an opportunity to deeply know another person, their challenges, dreams, and perspectives. Before long, these young people began reaching out not just for professional advice, but to talk about life, family, and relationships. The key to proactive strategic generosity is not giving anything to anyone. It's identifying your unique zone of genius, the intersection between what you do well, what you enjoy doing, and what the world needs, and using it as a bridge to create authentic connections. Dona Carmen, 71, discovered her unique zone of genius unexpectedly. An excellent cook, she was always praised for her family recipes but never considered them special. When she began applying proactive strategic generosity, she decided to teach her traditional recipes to young people who lived alone and didn't know how to cook. She started offering free classes in the neighborhood square on Saturday mornings. What happened exceeded all expectations. In 3 months, Carmen had created a community of over 30 people of all ages who met weekly. But the most incredible part was that the cooking classes became something much bigger, a space for exchanging experiences, mutual support, and genuine friendships. Carmen didn't just teach recipes, she became the matriarch of a chosen family that sees her as a reference point and emotional support. The second revolutionary attitude is even more powerful and counterintuitive: selective connective vulnerability. This concept goes against everything we've learned about maintaining appearances in later life. Researcher Brené Brown spent decades studying vulnerability and discovered something extraordinary: the courage to be imperfect is the foundation of all authentic human connection. But be careful, I'm not talking about oversharing or exposing your fragilities indiscriminately. Selective connective vulnerability is a sophisticated skill that involves sharing genuine aspects of your human experience with the right people, at the right time, in the right way. A Harvard University study analyzed over 10,000 conversations between strangers and discovered something fascinating. Conversations that evolved into lasting friendships shared a common trait: at some point, one person had the courage to share something real about their experience, fears, joys, or challenges. Not necessarily something dramatic, but something genuine that allowed the other person to see them as a complete human being, not just a social role. The tragedy of loneliness in old age is often linked to the fact that many people become characters of themselves. They play the role of the perfect grandparent, the polite lady, the experienced gentleman, but hide their real humanity. The result is that people connect with the mask, not the person, creating superficial and unsatisfying relationships. Teresa, 69, lived this intensely. Widowed for 5 years, she always presented herself as the strong woman who overcame everything. In conversations with neighbors and acquaintances, she spoke only about positive things, maintained a constant smile, and avoided any topic that might reveal her vulnerabilities. The result? Cordial but empty relationships where no one truly knew her. Teresa's transformation began one afternoon while talking with Anna, a neighbor 20 years younger. Anna commented on the difficulty of balancing work and motherhood, and Teresa, in a moment of impulse, shared something real. "You know, Anna, sometimes I feel like I spent my whole life being strong for everyone else and forgot how to be cared for. After my husband died, I realized I don't even know how to ask for help when I need it." What happened in that moment changed everything. Anna looked at her with a completely different expression, full of empathy and recognition. "Teresa, I never imagined you felt that way. I always saw you as this super confident woman." From that day on, their relationship deepened in an extraordinary way. Anna began seeking Teresa not just for casual chats, but to share her own insecurities and seek genuine advice. Selective connective vulnerability works because it breaks the barrier of perfection that prevents authentic connections. When you have the courage to show your real humanity, you give others permission to do the same. It creates a space of mutual authenticity where genuine relationships can flourish. But how do you apply this in practice without oversharing or creating discomfort? The key is graduation and reciprocity. You start by sharing light vulnerabilities and observe how the other person responds. If they respond with empathy and perhaps share something of their own, you can gradually deepen the level of authenticity. If they seem uncomfortable or change the subject, you keep the conversation more superficial. Roberto, 74, retired from sales, naturally mastered this technique during his professional years but had lost it in retirement. When he rediscovered selective connective vulnerability, he began applying it gradually in daily interactions. In a casual conversation with the building's doorman, instead of just complaining about the weather or talking about soccer, Roberto shared, "You know, Jose, sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices in life. I worked so much that I feel like I missed important moments with my family." Jose, who had always seen Roberto as a distant, successful resident, was surprised by the honesty and replied, "Mr. Roberto, I think about that too. I work so much here that sometimes I get home and my kids are already asleep." That simple exchange of authentic vulnerabilities completely transformed their relationship. Roberto discovered that Jose was an intelligent, thoughtful man with whom he could have deep conversations about life, family, and purpose. Jose began seeing Roberto not as a privileged resident, but as someone who also had struggles and doubts. The third revolutionary attitude is the most transformative of all: empathetic investigative curiosity. This skill goes far beyond polite questions or superficial interest in others. I'm talking about a specific way of relating that creates deep, instant, and lasting connections. A groundbreaking Harvard study found that people who ask follow-up questions during conversations are perceived as more intelligent, more interesting, and more socially attractive. But here's the secret: it's not the initial questions that create connection, it's the ability to ask questions that show you truly listened and care about the answers. Empathetic investigative curiosity is based on a fascinating discovery in social neuroscience. When someone feels genuinely heard and understood, their brain releases oxytocin, the same hormone released during hugs and moments of intimacy. It's literally possible to create chemical bonds through the quality of your attention and curiosity. But most people, especially in later life, do the opposite. They turn conversations into monologues about their own experiences, give unsolicited advice, or ask superficial questions just to be polite. The result is interactions that leave both parties feeling unseen and misunderstood. Imagine the difference between these two approaches. First person asks, "How was your day?" Receives a standard answer, "It was good, thanks." And the conversation dies. Second person asks the same question, gets the same answer, but follows up, "I'm glad to hear that. What made your day especially good?" That second question changes everything because it shows genuine interest and invites deeper reflection. Marcia, 65, was known in her neighborhood as the friendly woman who greeted everyone, but she had few close friends. Her conversations followed the same pattern: polite questions, superficial answers, comments about the weather. When she discovered empathetic investigative curiosity, she decided to try a different approach. At the bakery, instead of just greeting the clerk, Marcia asked, "You always seem so cheerful here. What helps you keep that positive energy in a job that must be pretty tiring?" The young woman was visibly surprised and touched. She shared that she was studying at night to change careers and that working at the bakery, though exhausting, was teaching her a lot about dealing with people. Marcia then asked the follow-up question that changed everything: "What kind of career are you pursuing? And what excites you most about that change?" From that day on, her visits to the bakery turned into genuine conversations about dreams, challenges, and personal growth. The clerk began saving Marcia's favorite bread and seeking her out to share updates about her studies. Empathetic investigative curiosity works because it fulfills one of the deepest human needs: the need to be seen, understood, and valued as a unique individual. When you show genuine interest in another person's inner experience, you're offering a rare and precious gift. How do you develop this skill in practice? The first step is changing your intention in conversations. Instead of thinking, "What will I say?" or "How will I present myself?" ask yourself, "What interesting thing can I discover about this person, and how can I help them feel seen and understood?" The second step is mastering the art of deepening questions. After any answer someone gives, you can use phrases like, "That's interesting, tell me more about, how was that for you? What stood out most to you in that situation? How did you feel when that happened?" Carlos, 70, a former university professor, was always good at explaining concepts but terrible at listening. His conversations were disguised lectures where he shared knowledge but rarely discovered anything new about others. When he learned empathetic investigative curiosity, his social life was completely transformed. At a family lunch, instead of dominating the conversation with stories from his teaching days, Carlos decided to apply his new skill with his 16-year-old grandson. "Pedro, you said you're enjoying school more this year. What changed?" Pedro, used to his grandfather's lectures, was surprised by the question and replied that he had a really cool history teacher. Carlos resisted the urge to compare it to his own experience and continued investigating. What does that teacher do differently that makes the classes interesting? Pedro lit up and explained how the teacher used games and simulations to teach history. Carlos then asked, "And how do you feel during those classes?" Pedro reflected and said he felt smart and capable of understanding complex things. That 20-minute conversation created a connection between grandfather and grandson that hadn't existed for years. Pedro left feeling understood and valued. Carlos discovered fascinating aspects of his grandson's personality he had never noticed. From that day on, Pedro began seeking his grandfather out for conversations about school, friends, and dreams. The combination of these three attitudes creates an extraordinary synergistic effect. Proactive strategic generosity positions you as someone valuable with something to offer. Selective connective vulnerability humanizes you and creates spaces for authenticity. Empathetic investigative curiosity makes people feel special and understood. Together, these three attitudes transform you into a magnetically attractive person socially. But here's something crucial: these attitudes are not social manipulation techniques. They work because they are authentic expressions of our best human nature. When you genuinely care about others' well-being, have the courage to be authentic, and show real curiosity about others' experiences, you create the ideal conditions for meaningful relationships to flourish. A longitudinal study followed 1,200 people for 15 years and discovered something extraordinary. Individuals who consistently applied these three behaviors not only had broader and more satisfying social networks, but also better physical health, lower rates of depression, and a greater sense of purpose in life. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, but the first results appear surprisingly quickly. Maria, Joao, Teresa, Roberto, Marcia, and Carlos all began noticing significant changes in their social lives within weeks, not because they found special people, but because they became special people to find. Loneliness in old age is not an inevitable sentence. It is not a natural consequence of aging or the loss of social roles. It is the result of specific behavioral patterns that can be identified, understood, and transformed. When you master proactive strategic generosity, selective connective vulnerability, and empathetic investigative curiosity, you don't just fight loneliness, you create a rich, meaningful, and deeply satisfying social life. Think about the most connected and beloved people you know. Observe how they behave. You'll likely notice that consciously or unconsciously, they apply these three attitudes naturally. They offer value to others, have the courage to be authentic, and show genuine interest in the people around them. The good news is that these are skills that can be learned and developed at any age. It doesn't matter if you're 60, 70, 80, or older. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself shy or extroverted. It doesn't matter what your current level of isolation is. These three attitudes can be applied starting today, in any context, with anyone. Start small. Choose one of the three attitudes and apply it in a single interaction today. Maybe offer useful advice to someone facing a challenge you've already overcome. Maybe share something real about your experience in a casual conversation. Maybe ask a deeper follow-up question to get to know someone you regularly encounter better. Observe how the other person responds. Pay attention to how you feel during and after the interaction. Notice the difference in the quality of the connection that forms. Use that experience as motivation to keep applying and refining these skills. Remember, you have decades of accumulated experience, knowledge, and wisdom. You have unique stories, valuable perspectives, and a depth of understanding that only comes with maturity. You are not a social burden waiting for others to pity you. You are a human treasure waiting to be discovered and valued. The loneliness epidemic in later life is real and devastating, but it doesn't have to include you. With these three simple but powerful attitudes, you can not only fight isolation but create a network of relationships richer and more satisfying than anything you've experienced before. Your journey toward authentic connection begins now. The next person you interact with could be the start of a transformative friendship. The next moment of vulnerability could be the bridge to genuine intimacy. The next curious question could reveal something extraordinary about someone you thought you already knew. Don't wait for others to take the initiative. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel completely ready. The most meaningful connections are born when we have the courage to take the first step, to be the first to offer value, authenticity, and genuine interest. Your social life doesn't have to be hostage to circumstances. You have the power to transform it completely, one conversation at a time, one attitude at a time, one authentic connection at a time. The world is full of people waiting for someone like you, someone who offers something valuable, has the courage to be real, and shows genuine interest in their experiences. Start today. Your richest and most satisfying social life is waiting for you on the other side of these three simple but revolutionary attitudes.